welcome everyone for another edition of the Rising Tide Foundation lecture series or symposium on storytelling, myth-making, and universal history, where we have the honor of presenting our great friend, Irene Eckert, who is a German-based journalist, historian, activist, somebody who has devoted decades of their lives to stopping war. And I think with today's developments that have been ongoing now, especially over the past week, it is very important that people think about not just the changing fluid geopolitical dynamics, which is obviously very important to keep the mind locked onto, but more importantly is to look at the deeper historical and cultural waves that are shaping the current world, both for the good and for the bad, into what we see unfolding around us. And certainly had certain developments not occurred, especially as Irene went through in her last lecture a few months ago to us regarding the subversion of great classical German scholars and ideas in Germany after World War II as part of a political agenda to crush a real foundation for a culture that prized freedom, sovereignty, independence, and real creative thinking and love of our fellow men and women, both now and into the future. If that subversion had not happened, I think that it's safe to say that the insights needed to avoid the types of lies, ugly ideas, and just illusory thinking that has no bearing in reality would not have occurred. People would have not fallen for the sorts of ugliness in their media and the talking heads that they've been presented on TV, who have justified all sorts of wars, encroachments of military operations onto countries that obviously do not want war. And right now I'm talking about something outside of the transatlantic, and other just terrible things that have occurred in the name of freedom and democracy and justice, which really lost all value when you see the type of actions that have been done. So obviously culture is very important. The types of stories is very important. What we shape our own identities with, what we shape our children's identities with, around something that is beautiful or ugly is very important. Sorry, my cat is going crazy. And so Irene is a wonderful person to introduce some of these ideas to us yet again. And the topic today will be Schiller versus the Congress for Cultural Freedom. I won't say any more than I just said. Irene, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Matthew, for that wonderful introduction. And I want to begin with thanking you, Matthew and Cynthia, not only for providing the space here, the platform, also to assembling the audience. And I also want to thank the audience for coming together and being prepared to listen. But I also want to thank both of you because you suggested the title, and of course you also had the idea for this whole series of conferences. And this title, Schiller and the Congress for Cultural Freedom, intrigued me at the beginning quite a lot, but then it opened up possibilities and paths of digging down into, my own history, because I studied German language and literature in the 70s, and I had not the faintest notion of what I was going to discover when I began sort of studying the subject that you had suggested. So thank you very much. And I also would like, sort of as a prelude, to express my sort of, confusion is not the right word, but the melody or the tune of freedom that I'm calling upon when opening my lecture has been overshadowed in the recent days, of course, with the war cries and also, of course, seemingly these two aspects are maybe on a superfluous level, disconnected. But then in reality, the war taking place, or the conflict, should I rather say, in Ukraine, and the tune of freedom that we have heard so loudly recently resonating among the people all over the globe, to my personal understanding, they are only two, well, I could say two aspects of the same, well, not the same, but of a war being waged against the people, a war being waged by a tiny minority, a clique, an elite that Matthew has often referred to in his writings, that is, on the one hand, depriving people of their basic rights and constitutional rights, and it's a liberticidal kind of going against people. And on the other hand, we have this really a war front now that, if you only look at it from a very superficial and ahistorical viewpoint, you don't understand what is going on, and people are completely being misled into believing that the Russians are the evil. And if you look at it from a historical viewpoint, you become more acquainted with the reality that is underneath the conflict. And this brings me to my subject, because the battleground of ideas, that is what we are dealing with when we are talking about Schiller and the Congress for Cultural Freedom. And the battleground of ideas, and also again, Matthew and Cynthia have very often pointed out to this, is perhaps more important even than the shooting on the ground. So what we really have to dig into is we have to find ways into cutting through myths and to find truth in the in the narratives that are being constructed for us. Having said that, I will this time stick to my prepared notes, because it's quite a lengthy lecture that I have prepared. And if you have the impression that it's too much, and if you want me to pause, or if you think I should finish and we should open up a dialogue, so please don't hesitate to signal that, okay? Beginning, I would like to begin with a quote from Friedrich Schiller that possibly each of you has heard at some point in her or his education. And it is from Wilhelm Tell. "No, there is a limit to the tyrant's power. When the oppressed man finds no justice, when the burden grows unbearable, he appeals with fearless heart to heaven, and then hence brings down his everlasting rights, which there abide inalienably his and indestructibly as stars themselves." This is, of course, the famous, taken from the famous Rütli Oath in Schiller's Tell, and I will come back to this later. With the global call for freedom as a unifying theme of the day, the freedom poet Friedrich Schiller is back on stage. The German poet of the classical period, he lived from 1759 to 1895, most popular, perhaps for his Wilhelm Tell, describes beautifully what man brings man closer to mankind. In his philosophical poem, The Walk, he rhymes, "Strife brings great things to the fore, greater their union brings forth." Every freedom-loving person's soul in the four corners of the planet is touched by the call to unite in defense for inalienable rights. Schiller's verses resonate because he combines beauty and reason, poetry and political thinking in the most remarkable way. Wilhelm Tell, the last of Schiller's plays on stage during his lifetime, advocates passionately for the right to resist unjustified power, and Schiller's complete work breathes the spirit of his time, the spirit of the American and the French Revolution. It is the call for freedom, equality, and brotherhood that inspired his beautiful mind. As a historian, Schiller laid the ground for a universal approach to history. As a philosopher, he provided a theory of the aesthetic. And as a poet, he coined the most beautiful verses in German language. But as a dialectic thinker, he also saw the world likes to blacken the sublime. How very true in a world where a Christian Drosten, inventor of the PCR test, is honored with providing the annual Schiller speech of 2020. Referring to Schiller as a medic colleague, a pretentious Drosten concludes Schiller would wear a face mask. Referring to, how far can you cynically distort reality in your arrogant ignorance? Schiller's ethics and the intentions of the inventor of the PCR test could not be further apart. Whereas the fake professor belongs to the elitist world, shaped by the mentors of the equally pretentious Congress for Cultural Freedom, Friedrich Schiller belongs to the freedom-hungry masses. Whereas Schiller sought a way out of slavery and saw the independence of mind and soul as a precondition to full liberation, the Congress for Cultural Freedom is anathema to everything the freedom poet stands for. Whereas Schiller called for all-round education, the CIA-funded mission of the Cold War institution, CCF, was neither freedom nor liberating education. On the very contrary, the CCF's mission was to keep people dumb and apart. The multiple branches of the agency fought for the class interests of a tiny minority in opposition to the laboring masses. Schiller's background was modest. His parents were small people, but his bright mind secured him the privilege of a princely education. He truly liberated himself and never became a bred student, nor any nobleman's servant at any time. This is why his poetry is authentic. His verses speak to everybody, and he reaches mind and soul. The great man literally devoted his own life to freedom, enlightenment, and beauty. He lived what he believed in, namely that only through the morning gate of the beautiful you make your way into the land of cognition. Schiller in the poem The Artists, 1789. Together with the Song of the Bell and the Walk, the artist form a triad of historically and philosophically most important poems. Again, whereas every word from Schiller reflects his authentic search for truth, everything that came from the collaborators of the CCF, the Congress for Cultural Freedom, was fake and artificial. Equipped with extraordinary foreign funding, their contributors had to be paid well for. The consequential CCF inauguration party was ironically held in the Titania Palace, a movie theater in Berlin, Steglitz. Madame Eleanor Dulles, the sister of the Satanic Brothers, bore responsibility for the thing that was in fact neither a congress nor had it any serious connection with culture or freedom. It was a psyop set up as a global spiderweb for subversive intelligence, designed to engage artists for cheating people's minds. The endeavor of all their hirelings was meant to hinder national liberation movements everywhere and to block their struggle for freedom and sovereignty. In many respects, the German people had a very special role to play in that gambling for power that dated way back to the Peace of Westphalia, even beyond Martin Luther's days. But that is another chapter which can be approached by reading Schiller's historical works. Here we are dealing with Friedrich Schiller as the epitome of not only German, but European culture. And after World War II, the CCF wage scribes were commissioned to destroy this very culture. To whom this sounds too fantastic, may turn to everything that the Canadian historian Matthew Eckert, our friend, has published. The long-term project was done, the long-term project, of course, of the Congress for Cultural Freedom was done in a Fabian way, gradually and often without the even awareness of their proponents. A thwarted metaphor for turning Schillerian imagery into their opposite was the notorious Freedom Bell of the City Hall of Berlin-Steglitz in 1950. It was sponsored by the Anglo-Saxon liberators, a symbol of anti-communism. The freedom culture heroes used the beautiful image as a tool for directing the still Nazi-infected minds towards yet another war against the eternally evil Russians. In stark contrast, Schiller's famous ballad, The Bell, ends with a call for harmony, joy, and peace. Excuse me. And conquered, we will name her, to union may her heartfelt call, in brother love attune us all. Fair bell, to our city bow joy and increase, and oh, may thy first sound be hallowed to peace. Having said this, Schiller was by no means a naive idealist. The historian knew how man could dangerously be misled against man. With reference to the derailed French Revolution, he warned in the same ballad, man fears the tiger's fangs of terror, and still the deadliest of horror is man himself in error. Based on such insight, Schiller focuses on all-round education as a precondition for authentic freedom and true democracy. Obviously, dumb people can be misled more easily. This is also why Schiller did not believe in the uninformed majority vote. Feed the man and provide him with the means of education, and the dignity will come along. A slave will not be able to position himself against his master, or weigh the votes, don't count them. These are Schiller's ideas explicitly laid down in his torso, Demetrius, where the Polish nobleman Sapir proclaims Majority is madness. Reason has still ranked only with a few. Sapir is the only voice raised against the sinister plans of the Polish oligarchy to attack Russia and to illegally enthrone Demetrius. I would strongly recommend, especially in these days, that you read Demetrius. Unfortunately, it has not been completed, and nobody was allowed to finish the torso, not even Goethe, but it's so very up to date. And if it would be put on stage by good, intelligent and knowledgeable theater people, it would be a great educating contribution to comprehend how color revolutions of all centuries are being instigated. Now, Schiller, of course, knew a lot about the evil intentions of the mighty oligarchic forces situated above nation states. He understood their narrow-minded, egotistic visions and their need for a slavish people. Such knowledge put the poet in danger. Friedrich Schiller was shaped by the global Republican movement of his time, says Canadian writer Cynthia Chung. And indeed, the famous Rückli Oath reflects the spirit of the American Declaration of Independence. Such spirit can not be tolerated by the globalist elite and is an anathema to the financiers of a fake freedom culture. The mission of the oligarchs' intelligence services of all days has been to ban free thinking. Their intention was to prevent that either a Benjamin Franklin or a Friedrich Schiller or a Franklin D. Roosevelt, for that matter, was ever to disturb their games again. The intellectual foot soldiers of the Congress for Cultural Freedom, or otherwise CIA, were sent out after World War II to spoil an eminent victory of the Red Army on the cultural field. The Congress for Cultural Freedom was an answer to the multiple, very successful peace initiatives, such as the founding of the World Peace Council and the Stockholm Peace Appeal. Johannes R. Becher, poet and minister of cultural affairs in the young GDR, called the CCF feathers, quote, gangsters camouflaged as literary figures, end of quote. The hysteria wiped up against Russia today recalls the most vicious distortion of everything the Soviets and their allied peoples had fought for. Without such atrocious red smear, the battle of ideas might have been won by the Russians. While smearing the Soviet Russia for denying freedom rights in their hemisphere, the Anglo-Saxon Empire had, of course, not the faintest intention to grant freedom and sovereignty to the nations they had conquered. Growing economic wealth hid for decades the underlying reality of such falsehood. The German nation in the heart of Europe was one of their most cherished victims. Now it has become obvious. The Moor has served its purpose. He can go. Today's globalists, under the leadership of an empty suit, are even going as far as to deprive Germans of affordable energy supplies. Lightheartedly, they will destroy the German industrial base if their leaders do not follow suit, which we have seen now, they do follow suit. But even if they, if their leaders do not follow suit as they are expected to do and refuse to open a new front against the Russians, and if they do obey, as we have seen now, they will, this will happen just the same. Because the sanctions, of course, are hurting us more in the end than the Russians. Narrow-minded as these pseudo-leaders of the so-called rules-based orders are, their demented brains are seemingly unable to comprehend that the world has thoroughly changed since they inaugurated the Congress for Cultural Freedom. Fortunately, given the Chinese-Russian bond of survival, a new paradigm shift is on the horizon. But those who seek a way out of the bondage must be able to understand the opportunities offered from those alleged suppressor nations. If the freedom-seeking masses are able to cut off the mental framing, they will take the helping hand stretched out for them. The pathway to liberation has to first deconstruct the enemy image. Hopefully, this is already underway. Those masses out there struggling for human and humane survival, those out there in the streets will quickly learn how to differentiate between friend and foe. If they are successfully throwing off their chains, it will have been in vain that for 77 years, the Anglo-Saxon secret services were throwing around millions over millions of dollars. The heralds of a false freedom culture will have falsely tried to bring history to a halt. Hopefully. Let us recall that the devilish duo Churchill-Truman after the World War II even openly admitted that with doing away with Hitler, they had killed the wrong pig. They detested the anti-Hitler coalition. Once done away with their monster baby, their agents had to spin a worldwide wire-trap web of lies against those they wanted to kill next. Concord and peace were certainly not on their hawkish agenda. Nothing had their false notions of freedom in common with either Roosevelt's Four Freedoms, nor with Schiller's ideas of free souls. Educated human beings capable of developing their multiple talents in order to bring duty and inclination in accordance were not on their agenda. They replaced the classical humanist idea of freedom with a narrow notion of liberties, sought to free people from any social obligations. Humans should be free to do whatever their lust dictates them. Hedonism was to be the new freedom tune. Anything goes was the post-modern melody on the dance floor. The fate of women and children under such conditioned liberties would be none of their concerns. If such policies would be detrimental for entire societies and would consequently diminish birth rates, all the better for their sinister eugenic plans. These plans have been developed already during Schiller's lifetime by British priest Malthus. When George F. Kennan, father of the Cold War containment policy, congratulated the US composer Nicholas Nabokov, secretary of the Congress for Cultural Freedom in 1959, by saying, "I can think of no group of people who have done more to hold our world together than these last years, than you and your associates in the Congress for Cultural Freedom. In this country, the United States in particular, few will understand the dimensions and significance of your accomplishments." Now, we see through the cynicism of these implications, Kennan's world being that of the aggressive NATO military alliance, founded in 1949, with the intention to even unleash a nuclear war. Kennan's world is the Western Hemisphere as opposed to the then socialist 2/3 of the planet. His world refers to an exclusive elitist oligarchical clique with a distorted mindset of psychopaths. It is high time that we, the people, liberate us from the disastrous accomplishments of the institution he praises. Now, what are the long-term disastrous dimensions of the destructive CCF accomplishments? According to the New York Times, the funding of the CCF-CIA worldwide spun network of intellectual Cold Warriors ended in 1966. But its harmful influence on the global intellectual and artistic scene still remains, often covered by a false notion of modernity. The intellectual roots of such false progressiveness, however, date back to the beginning of the last century or even beyond. We find them with the Cambridge Apostles, the Fabian Society, the Bloomsbury Club, and more like-minded elitist bohemians with liaisons to the British Secret Services. See, for example, Leonard Woolf, Virginia Woolf's husband, a member of the Fabian Society, ex-colonial officer in Sri Lanka, where he held a senior position, and their notorious circle, which included H.G. Wells, Bertrand Russell, John Maynard Keynes, and many more of such perverted Malthusian minds. Now, had all the tax money and manpower at their disposal, the disposal of the Congress of Cultural Freedom, been spent in order to combat the mental impact of fascism, as they alluded, Friedrich Schiller himself would have approved of such an educational effort. But alas, the target of the CCF legions was beauty and reason itself. Given their perverted mindsets, this may even make sense for them. If all you want is control, beautiful souls and cognition are in your way. Therefore, the Dulles siblings, Kennan and their affiliate intelligentsia, did not like Schiller. Churchill has even been quoted as saying in 1940 that, that Britain's real target was not Nazi Germany, but the spirit of the German people, the spirit of Schiller. By downtreading their culture, the Germans were to be deprived of any love for their country, pride for their classical heritage, intellectual or artistic achievements was verboten. While the cultural freedom fighters were waving their false freedoms flag over the West Berlin's Titania Film Palace, their dollar-waving handlers had just divided Germany and provoked a hot war against the Korean people. When that one ended in 1953, they used the same liberating strategy against the Vietnamese. And it was to be only the beginning of a long period of never-ending wars initiated by the Trumpenists of the free world. In their ongoing freedom fight, they would destroy ancient cultural treasures and put the world into shambles as a result of their manifold nefarious activities. We see the spirit of the age wavering between perversity and brutality, between unnaturalness and mere nature, between superstition and moral unbelief. Friedrich Schiller. Friedrich Schiller. With Erich Maria Remarque, we could say that nothing new in the West. The English title of this anti-war novel by Erich Maria Remarque is All Quiet on the Western Front. So we could say with Erich Maria Remarque, when we have these words of Schiller's in the ear, that really nothing has happened since Friedrich Schiller commented the zeitgeist of the late 18th century. Lawlessness prevails. Democratic constitutions, the result of people's struggles of centuries, are carelessly cast into the trash box of history. But again, barriers have been erected now. Beginning with the double veto of Russia and China in the UN Security Council of 2012, the satanic measures against Syria came to a halt. The geopolitical chessboard is changing gradually since. This is the time to race with the tide and to rediscover the actuality of Schiller's works. Interesting enough. Oh. Who's that?
I don't know. It's somebody who just jumped on and had a child bouncing around, so it's okay.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
okay.
so,
Irene, I accidentally muted you. I'm sorry. You have to unmute yourself.
oh yeah, no, I watched one of your deals last night with the British guy. So I sent you an email, and I'm a little late to the party, but hey, I'll be quiet and listen.
No worries. It's good having you. Thanks.
Okay. So where was I? I wanted to underline that Schiller has always been highly appreciated, interesting enough, in Russia, and he is treasured in China. It is also time for a, okay, I want to bring in a little kind of discouraging moment I had just before the lecture, because I received an email from a friend who is very capable of reading and speaking English. and sort of criticizing me, which is not the first time I have heard that from other people, for sending around messages in English, and even something I myself have written in English. But of course, it is kind of ironic. I would write this in German. I would like to present such a lecture in German, but there is for the moment no audience for this, which is ironic because I was just underlining that Friedrich Schiller is appreciated abroad. And this is kind of a tragedy, but it is a purposefully provided for tragedy. Okay, nevertheless, I think it is time for a closer look into Schiller's ballad, The Cranes of the Ibicus. With this poem, Schiller demonstrates the power of poetry and dramatic art over the mean and brutal instincts of robbers and murderers. And I find this kind of interesting in this context. The ballad's symbolism offers a clue to another unaccounted for crime. Goethe, as Schiller's friend, must have seen a lot during his long life. He outlived Schiller for, I think, 28 years. But he also must have had reasons to remain silent during his lifetime. Only after his own death, Goethe speaks. With verses in Faust II, he takes up Schiller's Cranes of Ibicus, and covered in an anagram, he says what he didn't dare say during his lifetime. I wrote this down for myself. I have Goethe's verses, and I could quote them in the end if you like, but I only have them in German, referring in these verses that he wrote down in Faust II, referring to the Ibicus poem of Schiller. But here are Schiller's verses. Schiller rhymes as follows. The Cranes of Ibicus. It is interesting to know that Ibicus was an ancient poet, an antique poet, and Ibicus is derived from Greek crane. Deep wounded down he sinks at last, when lo, the crane's wings rustle past. He hears, though he no more can see, their voices screaming fearfully. By you, ye cranes that soar on high, be borne to heaven my murder cry. Friedrich Schiller, extract of the long ballad, The Cranes of the Ibicus. I will come back to this. If there are many ways to kill a man, distorting the legacy of a great person is perhaps even worse than murder. Now, the legacy of Germany's poet of freedom and national liberation is purposefully neglected in my home country and has been so for many years. While Schiller's plays have almost disappeared from curricula and stage, storytelling and symbolic policy remain to be of greatest importance for the maintenance of control. Therefore, it is not a small issue that Schiller's birthplace in Marbach on the River Neckar is maintained only as an attraction for tourists and folklore reasons. Nothing in the poet's home points to the mental legacy of the famous author. What we see there are portraits of his parents, baby clothes, a statue of the adult, and not to forget a quote over the entrance door suggesting that Schiller liked beer. There is method in such dumbness and neglect. Neither the Schiller National Museum in Marbach of 1903 nor the literary archive there are explicitly devoted to Schiller's work. What is more, the museum is closed again. its recently appointed female director, maybe not a negligible fact either, announced a review of the entire exhibition. Its reopening is scheduled for February 23, and in the meantime, Schiller's aesthetic theories will be put under scrutiny. Another irony, this will be done under the supervision of two women in chief positions whose qualifications bear no reference to Schiller. This goes to show the ongoing ambiguity concerning Schiller's legacy. Not only does Schiller's scowl still now and then encourage journalists to ironic comments, in reality, the poet's bones are lost forever. It seems as if the legacy of the classical author has become the spoils of a dubious rebel. While Schiller is quoted as the German Shakespeare abroad, decency with respect to him is missing at home. The author of Wilhelm Tell, Maria Stuart, the Virgin of Orleans, and the anti-war trilogy Wallenstein would have had some ideas of his own about such nonsensical sarcasm. He might have seen ghosts at work, gangsters of a similar mindset as those depicted in his unfinished novel, The Ghost Seer. Again, interestingly enough, it was Canadian writer Cynthia Chung, our friend, co-founder of the Rising Tide Foundation, who recently provided a thorough analysis of the fragment, explaining how Schiller knew how to declassify evil by means of aesthetic. Nobody really I know has read The Ghost Seer. I have tried before once long ago, and I couldn't really understand what was. I didn't really find it interesting, and it was really through Cynthia that I became curious. Now, again, another issue with Schiller, sometimes experienced alleged nationalistic undertones in Schiller's works. While Schiller created some of the most beautiful and popular literature in German verses, his dramatic art, his philosophical and historical contributions are void of any nationalistic overtones. Don Carlos and Wilhelm Tell were banned between 1941 and 45. Of course, the Spanish nobleman Marquis Posa speaks truth to power, and the Swiss national hero Tell denounces dictatorship by his very actions. Schiller's characters and metaphor reach out far beyond national borders. They are telling and timeless and universal. The notorious greeting of the Gessler head has become a strong symbol of seemingly senseless repression. Today, the greeting of the dictator's head reminds everybody in the know of the debasing muscle and mind cuff unnaturally forced upon humans in public on a global scale now. With growing repression, we also see that the globalist clique has gone too far. The actuality of Schiller's Tell has perhaps never been more to the point than at this very moment of history. How desperate must the still governing clique be if they need to send out children camouflaged as Antifa heroes and make them call out tax-paying citizens and Democrats in defense of their legal rights as Nazis. Ironically, this tactic is applied on a global scale. These poor kids should rather go to school and learn that the historic Nazis were in fact neither. They were neither national nor socialist as pretended by their name giving. Questions must also be raised as to why patriotic feelings are okay in a football stadium, but tabooed outside. The fashionable call Nazi is just another spin applied internationally now to denounce people's rightful protest against anti-democratic, anti-constitutional, anti-freedom measures. Remarkable in this context is that the governing Green Party in Germany recently went so far as to delete the term Germany, Deutschland, from the very election platform, from their election platform. But will such shrewd ideas contribute to wiping out national sentiments, or will they rather assist real neo-Nazis in leadership positions to do their job unattended? Fact is that only a small fraction of the German electorate voted for the Greens. Their globally trained leaders have nevertheless miraculously been maneuvered into key government positions. Such maneuvering was done to the Germans before. But name avoiding will only prevent some people from understanding the true nature of the phenomenon, which in reality is a transnational disease. The transnational evil minds who brought about not only the NAZs, but are in reality responsible for fascism on a global scale still hold the riches they sucked in from the four corners of the world, riches that the laboring masses produced. Therefore, they can command an army of mercenaries in their totally controlled media. Profit-hungry, warmongering, and scrupulous as they are, they hold even the tools to deroot entire populations and implant them elsewhere. The merciless sociopaths, bereft of any conscious, moral, or reason, continue to destroy age-old cultural achievements. Latest, most mind-boggling example that I remember was Palmyra in Syria. Like Palmyra, Schiller is an emblematic symbol of human culture. Honoring Schiller and remembering Palmyra in one breath, we defend the cultural heritage of humanity. What is being done to one of us is being done to us all. With the ongoing global uprising, I believe that the healing process has already begun. Struggling for freedom, for peace and democracy also demands an inclusive understanding of the intrinsic and forward-looking value of the classical culture at home and abroad. It is good to sense that Schiller's Don Carlos breathes the atmosphere of pre-revolutionary Europe. It is good to know that it gained the young playwright French citizenship. Liberté, fraternité are Schiller's intrinsic moral values. These ethical standards characterize the entire work, which reflects the ideas of the American and the French Revolution before they were hijacked and turned into a caricature of itself. During the last 2 years, the oligarchical imperial forces have literally driven people into the streets everywhere. The vicious tools applied to suppress and even kill large parts of the population under a Malthusian, a green, or a Great Reset agenda are not working as smoothly as intended. The masterminds of an internationally organized clique, a bankers guild, a Bilderberg club, a Davos forum, a Fabian society, a fake chorus of writers and fake creatives, with their pretentious accusations against the rest of the human race, will eventually meet their maker. At least that's what we hope for. And if we don't hope for it, it will happen anyway. Once people understand what is being played, once they understand what is being played, human beings will not allow themselves to be deprived of their livelihood or to be selectively murdered. Real people with brains and bronze and beautiful minds do not want to be replaced by artificial intelligent robots, neither. The meant to be disposables will fight for their inalienable rights, as Schiller most preciously predicted or described or called in his Tell drama. In their struggle to overcome Orwellian distortion of reality, they will turn away from postmodernist abstract emptiness and brutality in the arts. Last shining example for such an inspiring impulse to the nationwide and global support latest shining example for such an inspiring impulse is, or was, should I rather say, now the nationwide and global support for the Canadian Freedom Convoy. Turning down the truckers with brutal force will only call on more resistance to their sinister plans. The beginning of a new patriotic freedom culture starts right here with the struggle of real people. Young Canadian historian Matthew Eckert has contributed much to make the underlying stream of history visible. His publications help us to see hitherto unknown aspects of what he calls the unfinished symphony, and which deals with the US and also the latent Canadian anti-colonial struggle. When Matthew finished his 2 volumes, he could not know yet that it would be in his hitherto very calm country, Canada, where the waters would be boiling up to the cooking point. The brainwashing machinery is now confronted with serious trouble. The warping of terms, the spinning of metaphors, the turning of symbols into their very opposite, and the waving of false flags, basic elements of the ideological warfare are becoming toothless once people raise up and experience the reality of the naked forces behind the false promises. You can only fool some of the people some of the time. Human weaknesses will, of course, always be targeted by the manipulators. That is so and cannot be avoided. But once confronted with the naked truth of power, many people will long for literature like Schiller's Tell, but also The Ghost Seer, a novel, an unfinished novel, but still a novel that provides the most useful guide through the eternally applied dirty tricks of the ruling, quote, or should I say, pseudo-intelligence. As foreseen by Schiller, with the intensification of historic battles, narratives become more and more important. As the battle for ideas intensifies, the mind itself becomes a target. The very existence of rationality is at stake, and the ideas even of the beautiful, or the idea of the beautiful too. But as we are witnessing, if the burden becomes unbearable, people rise up and take back their inalienable their natural rights as set in the Ruthly Oath. We really have to be aware of this in order not to despair. It is very important, and I find it always inspiring to read Wilhelm Tell again and again. There is so much depth in this drama, written over 200 years ago. With the founding of the Cultural Congress for, quote, freedom, the Orwellian distortion of reality had already once reached a historically new level. An Orwellian spinning of notions into their opposite, as we are witnessing right now in front of our very eyes with respect to what's going on in the Ukraine. This Orwellian spinning of notions into their opposite is not new, but we must be aware of it. The creation of Black legends, the propagation of a spirit of misery and negativity was spread with the Congress of Cultural Freedom in an unimaginable breadth around the globe. In 1950, when this Congress was inaugurated, the ruling elites saw the need to sponsor a massive brainwashing industry because they knew that it was the Red Army that had defeated Hitler, and they did not like it. Once their artificially created monster puppet gone, they quickly stigmatized the entire German people as the eternal NAZ. The German nation, which was never identical with the Reich, as Schiller has already said, by the way, was falsely declared responsible not only for Hitler, but for the two great wars. Paradoxically, while pretending to rein in such an epitome of evil people, they prepared the same evil people for another attack on Soviet Russia. The nation of poets and thinkers whose cultural achievements were once admired by the world, in particular in Russia, was humiliated by targeting its cultural heritage. By the way, when dealing with Schiller's works again, I also discovered anew how closely the German and the Russian culture was intermeshed. And just half a year before Schiller died, Maria Pavlovna married the son of the Duke of Weimar, and she was an admirer of Schiller, and Schiller was very appreciated in St. Petersburg already. It's interesting, given the situation we face today, what kind of hatred we sort of express with respect to the Russian nation, in fact, altogether. Yeah, I lost my track now. So paradoxically, while pretending, I said that already, to rein in that evil people, they at the same time rearmed it in order to prepare them for another attack on Russia. And they wanted to rid this nation at the same time of their positive attitude towards their own culture, and the memory of classical Weimar, known to the world as site of Goethe, Schiller, and Herder, was to be wiped out by connecting the place forever with the concentration camp and death camp, which in fact was erected on the Etterberg, the death camp Buchenwald. Following generations should not know about Bruno Apit's novel Naked Under Wolves, or they should not learn about Teddy Tellman's murder just a couple of days before the war ended, or they should not know the amazing fact that the camp inmates of Buchenwald liberated themselves before the liberators came in. Well, in the age of a mysterious, everlasting pandemic and a newly unleashed Cold War hysteria, novels of the 40s are propagated anew. Novels like humanistic ideas carrying Bruno Apit's Naked Under Wolves, completely forgotten, but novels like those that had been propagated during the 40s, spreading negativity, like Camus' Peste, The Stranger, Sartre's Nausea, George Orwell's Animal Farm, and 1984, are re-emerging on the bookshelf. We must be aware that it was such literature, such light literature, that prepared the stage for animosities that we are witnessing now. Yeah. But I am convinced that as life for the masses has become shallow and without any purpose or beauty, literally on the pretended eve of destruction, they would turn away from existentialist literature. They will eventually throw such novels away as junk, and they will discover again that such brutality, advocating not only novels but cartoons, games, texts, theater plays, films, even operas, as had been propagated during this heavily funded freedom culture epoch, that they will have had enough of it. Literature in those days was heavily supported. Literature from psychopaths or even convicted criminals, male prostitutes, like Jean Genet, a protege of Sartre's. Such literature, people will discover that it doesn't nourish their hunger for sense. Literature like Anthony Artaud and the theater of the absurd will be forgotten, whereas great writers like Louis Aragon will be rediscovered and cherished again. Primitive rites intended to shock the audience into an awareness of the cruelty of violence of life will no longer be welcomed on the stage. Dramas like Peter Weiss's Persecution and Assassination of Jean-Paul Marat, as performed by the inmates of the asylum of Charenton under the direction of the Marquis de Sade, or his equally provocative play Trotsky in Exile, will quickly lose attraction. But such negativity provided by wage scribes under the influence on the CCF handlers and their multiple follow-ups were meant to weaken the spirit of resistance. I remember the first play I was confronted with in my first semester studying German literature was exactly Peter Weiss's Marquis de Sade. I mean, Schiller was not on the agenda. No, during my entire studies. But I am convinced with the reawakening of the spirit of the authentic hunger for freedom and the struggle, people will rediscover and long for authentic literature and philosophical achievements such as Schiller, and they will rediscover Schiller's idea of the beautiful soul that humans are capable to develop. the trust in the possibility to edify the human spirit through the arts, the notion of love in the sense of agape that reaches beyond sensual satisfaction, the idea of courage voluntarily displayed for the defense of higher values, even at the cost of one's life, or the insistence on educating humanity in order to create better conditions for breaking the chains of slavery and oppression, the conviction that the search for truth is worth the effort. Such constructive Schillerian ideas will no longer be treated as idealistic trash. And indeed, it was in Berlin in July 2020 that Schiller's bell rang again for harmony and peace, and the tune of the Ode of Joy was back when John F. Kennedy's nephew spoke to hundreds of thousands of fearless, friendly and freedom-shouting people around the Victoria Column in Berlin. Michael Ballweg, an IT expert, a Swabier like Friedrich Schiller, main organizer of the mass rally, quoted Schiller's famous words, and please allow me to quote them in German. I will translate it in a moment with my own words. Das ist nicht des Deutschen Größe, ob zu siegen mit dem Schwert, in das Geisterreich zu dringen, männlich mit dem Wahn zu ringen, das ist seines Eifers wert. Hören Sieg hat der errungen, der Wahrheit Blitz geschwungen, der die Geister selbst befreit. Freiheit der Vernunft erfechten, heißt für alle Völkerrechten, gilt für alle ewige Zeit. The essence of these verses in English, although not the beauty of the verse, is what makes Germany great is not the winning of the battle of the sword. Whoever penetrates the realm of the spirit and struggles bravely with false conceptions has achieved a superior victory. Whoever grasped the flash of lightning of truth, whoever fought for the freedom of the mind and who defended reason, has fought for all humanity, and this is an eternal truth. I really had tears in my eyes when I heard Michael Ballweg quote these verses, although he was, of course, interrupted by the police, but that's another story. But the spirit was there, and Friedrich Schiller's vision, his love for beauty, cutting through all artificial boundaries, has reemerged. As Swabian, Michael Ballweg demonstrated Schiller's ideas are stronger than any threadbare fake intelligence. Wolf von Schierbrand, at the beginning of the 20th century, commemorating the centenary of Schiller's death, told his US audience what has made the freedom poem unique in his eyes. He mentions non-measurable spiritual qualities like noble pathos, extraordinary wealth for imagery, love of liberty, and insisting on human worth, plus contempt, plus contempt for caste and rank distinction, purity of soul, polish of expression, and appreciation of women. These qualities, says Schierbrand, explain why Schiller then was the most popular poet among German youth and women, much more popular than Goethe or even Heinrich Heine. And with Hegel and Hölderlin, Novalis and Mörike, Uhland and Hermann Hesse, Schiller's home region contributed more intelligence and beauty than other German Länder, of far bigger size. That in mind, and with a profound knowledge of Schiller's complete work, the next generation is well prepared to overcome the long-term devastating results of destructive intelligence strategies that aimed at wiping out patriotism. Can I continue, or is it enough? Is it enough? Do you want to hear more?
I think people are open for more. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, thank you, CIA. Is my next sort of chapter, because I want to underline that, however, I am full of hope and appreciation for the re-emergence of Schiller's spirit, and I see that people are struggling in the streets all over the world. However, just as if to remind us that we must not triumph before the end of the day. Only last summer in 2021, the daily Süddeutsche Zeitung ironically titled, "Thank you, CIA," and went on, with the CCF, the US Secret Service intended to bring the left on the right path. Yes, that they achieved. And fun fact, much good came out of it, says the Süddeutsche Zeitung. Everything that the Congress for Cultural Freedom undertook was meant to weaken the communist ideology. Ex-communists, alleged ex-communists in parentheses, like Arthur Koestler and Ignazio Silone warned the West against Stalin's realm of terror. So this is the achievements we have to thank the CCS for. And indeed, George Orwell's dystopia Animal Farm belongs to the realm of the fake freedom culture defenders. Subsidized by British intelligence, it was meant as a political satire on Stalin's Russia. When it was first published in England in August, it's interesting, the date, August 17th in 1945, it came just in time to help divert public feelings away from the negative mental effects that the dropping of the atom bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki had caused, and steered public conscience towards Russians. As an agent for a secret propaganda wing of the UK Foreign Office, Orwell provided a list of unsuitable persons and suggested possible writers for the anti-communist propaganda effort. Disinformation warfare was the declared intention. Among the high-ranking and most popular individuals qualified there as unworthy for the dirty job was Paul Robeson, great Black artists then of enormous popularity around the world, a trained lawyer, an all-American football player, and above all, a baritone singer and actor whom the intelligence services destroyed in the 50s through MK-Ultra techniques and more. Orwell helped destroy Robeson, accusing him as anti-white, but also for campaigning in support of the Welsh coal miners. Target one, no matter how, and get them all. Here is the empire's way to the cancel culture at its worst in a nutshell. Worthy intellectuals in Orwell's eyes were creatures like Robert Conquest, Arthur Koestler, and pseudo-pacifist Bertrand Russell, who willingly composed the wanted tune. Orwell's satire Animal Farm was also directed against Schiller's vision for a brotherhood of men. At the same time, a key contribution to the Cold War. The nefarious ideological war was unleashed immediately after FDR's, Franklin D. Roosevelt's, premature death on April 12th in 1945. The Dallas CIA CCF combatants in fact continued the NS warfare against Bolshevism under their false freedom flag. Like the Nazis did before, they targeted the USSR. Their intention was identical, to dismantle and destroy it. While the likes of Orwell targeted the Soviet leaders, in reality, they projected their own empty soul onto them. While the likes of, a slavish character like the British agent sees in the call for brotherly love nothing but a red ruse. Orwell and his MI6, CIA, CCF collaborators ideologically contributed to the nefarious purpose of the empire in their endeavor to colonize, enslave, and even diminish the peoples of the world. Whereas not all of the individuals on the CCF or the Ford Foundation or the Rockefeller Foundation payroll or recipients of their scholarship programs, mostly left-leaning intellectuals like Heinrich Böll, Günter Grass, Ernst Reuter, Willy Brandt, among countless others, have understood what purpose they served. Some might have had scruples, others consented, but none of them did raise questions. And if anyone did step out of line, like Günter Grass with his last ink, they were smeared as Nazi followers. Circumstances will, of course, always push weaker humans into being enmeshed with friendly providers of money and fame. All the more so as truly liberated men and women able to make their own choice and courageous enough to live what they believed in, have always been targeted by the mighty ones. Schiller's own fate is telling. His friend and colleague, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, rhymes in Faust II. Those who saw the truth and called it out have always been nailed to the cross and burnt. This is my own translation. I didn't find the English translation. The mental munition of the empire has always been slander, lie, distortion of reality, negativity, pessimism. Many of their instrumental voices in the 20th century were Trotskyites. Trotsky himself, having been nicknamed the Feather, is a telling example. Cynthia Chang has recently published an enlightening series of articles on the nefarious undermining influence of such key Trotsky adherents as James Burnham and their changing colors. Other key Trotskyites were Arthur Koestler and Melvin Jonah Lasky. They formed the backbone of the Congress for Cultural Freedom. Lasky was a proud US publisher of the anti-Stalinist left. In Germany, the prestigious journalist became very known for writing and editing for the well-paying Der Monat magazine, and was a frequent guest with the Internationale Frühschoppen, a popular Sunday morning TV show. Just as today, Russia, Soviet or not, was the supposed evil animal to be brought down to its knees. This goes to show their adversary, that the adversary they really targeted was peace and harmony, because they were barriers to their greed for the Russian riches. As Johannes R. Becher rightly saw from the get-go, the Congress for Cultural Freedom and their follow-up bodies were a direct answer to the enormously successful reach out by the Stockholm Peace Appeal launched in 1950. Frédéric and Irene Joliot-Curie, both French physicists and Nobel laureates, were heading the campaign to ban nuclear weapons. In this context, the fraudulent trial and horrific death sentence of the Rosenberg couple over the effort to keep the atomic secret in the hands of the West must be recalled. They shared concerns with their like-minded colleagues of the Appeal, the Stockholm Peace Appeal, with the support of a wide range of prestigious signatories like Anna Segers, Thomas Mann, Pablo Picasso, Pablo Neruda, Ilya Ehrenburg, Lion Feuchtwanger, Bishop Hewlett Johnson, Henri Matisse, Marc Chagall, and many, many others. The Appeal won hundreds of millions of supporters worldwide in no time. But with its success, the red smear began. On August 10th, 1950, the New York Times titled, "Peace Partisans Listed." The East Coast quality paper downgraded the survival instinct and the sense of the social responsibility of all the involved artists, intellectuals, and co-citizens. In spite of the blood toll of two major wars, in spite of the brain drain caused by the NS regime, the German nation in those days still counted a considerable number of creative minds. So did, of course, every nation on this planet. These intellectuals were eager to contribute to the peaceful reconstruction of their country, its transformation into a democratically constituted, free, neutral, and unified Germany. Exile had been no fun. Even the most privileged holders of US citizenship, like Thomas Mann, did not escape the witch hunt of McCarthy. Anna Segers, Bertolt Brecht, Helene Weigel, great actor and later director of the Brecht's Schiffsbauerdamm Theater in Berlin, GDR, Ernst Weinert, Johannes Erbecher, Ernst Bloch, author of Principal Hope, back from exile, ready to start again from scratch. They were more than happy to express themselves again in their beloved German mother tongue. It was the language they had missed most, the language of Goethe, Martin Luther, Friedrich Schiller. The German language could express everything, the most profound, the most subtle, the most volatile, the spirit and the soul. It was the language full of meaning, the mirror of a nation, says Friedrich Schiller. The nation of poets and thinkers was never identical with the Reich. As I said before, the Hitlerites had not only slaughtered millions, they had also not spared their own people, and the occupying intellectual foot soldiers and their hired media assistants continue to gradually destroy this nation and their language, not only the vocabulary, but also the grammar. But in those days after the war, in the 50s, still many of Schiller's beautiful verses were alive, vivid among the common people, words with wings, as a German expression has it. The anti-colonial New Deal, which President Roosevelt had foreseen, would have included the cultural field and would certainly have done a lot of good repair work. It would have mended bridges instead of opening an abyss between East and West. But with Roosevelt gone, a great dream was lost, as Stalin said, hitting the nail. But for the first post-war moment, a seemingly solid, even radiant Eastern Bloc still existed, busy to overcome the terrible damages of World War II. Stalin was alive, good patriots were leading the young GDR, with Johannes Erbecher as Minister of Cultural Affairs and Otto Grotewohl as Prime Minister. The classical heritage was cherished, at least in the eastern part of Germany. However, Stalin Prize laureate Brecht and the poet Johannes Erbecher would soon die another early death, and honorable anti-fascist Walter Ulbricht would be ousted by a coup. Erstwhile, the repatriates are full of energy and goodwill, and in 1955, Nobel Prize laureate Thomas Mann was invited to Weimar to commemorate Schiller's passing away 150 years ago. The site of Goethe, Schiller, Herder, Humboldt, Wieland, the city where the first German democratic constitution was drafted in 1919, was well chosen for the event. But West German Chancellor Konrad Adenauer, under the thumb of the transatlantic friends, would find excuses. Thomas Mann, back in Europe, sought to bridge the abyss when declaring his love for Schiller in Stuttgart first, the poet's home province Swabia, before he went on to speak in Weimar, GDR. Thomas Mann's last contribution to save the German culture. But as Schiller explained once with reference to the French Revolution, recent history has shown with painful clarity, if the moral character of the people is not developed, even the most idealistic revolution will fail. A vicious cycle suggests that without the state there can be no morality, and without morality there can be no state, despite the Enlightenment's lofty goals. But it is good to know that the saviors of culture are everywhere. We must not forget that not only Schiller's way of thinking was shaped by the idea of the American Revolution. Schiller's influence radiated back to the American continent. US Professor Lydia Moland from Stanford rightly points out, Schiller's thought has steadily influenced some of philosophy's most prominent debates. Friedrich Hegel, Wilhelm von Humboldt were early promoters of Schiller's aesthetic and political theories. Marx and Engels were praising his revolutionary spirit and diagnosis of the modern age. And Lydia Moland goes on to explain, because we recognize in the beautiful soul an image of human perfection, such harmony elicits our approval and love, and it continues to have this effect on whoever discovers his writing. Shall I continue, or is it enough?
Irene, no, for sure. Finish your composition, please.
Shall I finish? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. It's another interesting aspect because Thomas Mann in Weimar did a very important job. While during most of his life, he had preferred Goethe, in Weimar in 1955, he honored his late colleague Schiller in a most remarkable way. His speech underlined not only Schiller's importance, but he was the first one to finger point to Schiller's premature and most likely unnatural death. Thomas Mann begins his speech with describing the mysterious circumstances of Schiller's most unconventional funeral at midnight, without family or friends or public admirers. Thomas Mann points out to the various allusions in Goethe's Faust II. His speech would belatedly open the path to more in-depth research into the peculiar circumstances of Schiller's unduly passing away. Today we know that no excuse can explain the fact that the poet's course was cut up without delay by a doctor who did not have Schiller's trust during the poet's lifetime. With the unexplained fact of his wife and his 4 small children absent at the time of his passing away, it is unknown who gave the order and the permission for the autopsy. None of his dear ones participated in the hastily arranged funeral. The then already internationally treasured author's body was literally thrown into a mass grave. Schiller, who had always acted in a most responsible manner, had not left a last will, but a lot of unfinished projects on his desk. In many respects, he was at the height of his career. With his bones vanished, the truth about the death of the great poet may be lost on the bottom of a bottomless well. This is a line from Tennessee Williams' terrible piece, Suddenly, last summer. Tennessee Williams, belonging also to those, well, oligarchical hirelings, I would say. But humanity has a right to raise questions as to who might have had an interest in the early passing away of a genius like Schiller. People, in their struggle for survival, for freedom and dignity, the salt of the earth, must acquire full knowledge about the dirty tricks of the evildoers, because the same tricks are played against their leaders time and again. It is utterly important that the people learn how to protect them. The search for truth, the love for beauty, and expressive language is a most precious precondition for liberation, which always begins with conquering hearts and minds. Rediscovering some of Schiller's poetry might be a good start to save his legacy for future generations. Learning the beauty of their verses can undo the premature death of humanity's greatest poets: Schiller, Garcia Lorquilla, Pablo Neruda. Recalling the death of an antique poet also reminds us, only through the morning gate of the beautiful do you make your way into the land of cognition. Of Ibicus, that name so blessed, with newborn sorrow fills each breast, as waves on waves in ocean rise, from mouth to mouth it swiftly flies. Of Ibicus, whom we lament, who fell beneath the murderer's hand? What means those words that from him went? Yeah, with this Schiller verse, I will end this lecture. And thank you very much for your attention. You will excuse me for 1 second, yeah?
I think she probably just needs 30 seconds to do some stuff and then come back. I just shared in the chat box the Rising Tide Foundation dossier, the entry on Schiller. So anybody who wants to read English translations of Schiller's original works, his poems, his universal history lectures, and some additional essays, you can just click on that link, save it, and it's all there. I don't know, most of the translations are pretty good. I was just telling Irene, the audience, that I just shared the Rising Tide Foundation entry to Schiller, so all of his original, or as many of his original works that we could find digitally online are available there.
Yeah.
So I think you definitely whetted people's appetites to delve into Schiller's mind a lot more, and there are a few people who have gotten their names into the question and answer queue. So the first name that I saw was Gertrude.
Oh.
Gertrude, are you there? Can you hear us?
Yes, I'm here. I'm here. Wait a minute. Here I am. I would like to thank my friend Irene very much for this lecture. She's really made my day, because I would like to share something that happened to me today, which made me really depressive. I had a meeting with some of my former groups with whom I stood silent vigil for peace in the 80s and in the beginning of the 90s, and we hadn't met for 2 years. And today we had a meeting, and I said, okay, I have to be back at 8 o'clock for my friend's lecture. Now the meeting was postponed because all of those people wanted to go to the peace demonstration for Ukraine, but it was against Putin, and that depressed me very much. I thought I would like to share in that circle my own views about the power of the media and the one-sidedness of what those people believed. Yeah, and in the afternoon or in the morning, I had even looked for a film, which was a documentary film about what really was going on in Ukraine for the last 8 years. And I wasn't able to say a word because they were so enthusiastic. It was a demonstration of 500,000 people, mostly well-intentioned, in Berlin, without police, without water throwers, because every demonstration that was in the last 2 years was really suppressed by the police. And now 500 people can meet without restrictions, without masks. So I think that's what I read today. Putin should be awarded the Nobel Prize for Medicine because he was able to finish in 24 hours. Well, thank you, Matthew, that you enable that such lectures. It's wonderful. And I'm so glad that through my friend Irene, I am connected to such wonderful people, most of whom I don't know, except Edith Valentine. My greetings to Edith. And thank you for letting me share my experience and my emotions. And Irene really made my day.
Thank you.
That's all.
Yeah, thank you for that, Gertrude. And yeah, it's just wild to see how many people who have been peace activists over the past decades who, even stood up and spoke out against the bombing of Iraq and Libya have now just completely had their minds wiped and are now clamoring for defense of Ukraine, who, like you said, are not bad people, but there's something fundamentally missing in how they're organizing their way of thinking that is allowing them to be susceptible to all of this poisonous gossip flowing through the media. Really something. And all of this couldn't be made possible. I would just like to say this platform is great. Cynthia Chung's leadership and guidance has been instrumental in making these weekly lectures happen too. And it's really great, I think, that we're able to provide a platform to discuss real ideas in a time where I think that there's an increasingly high value on just substance, right, in a world of shadows. So there are a lot of messages of gratitude thanking you, Irene, for your composition. I don't see any more questions per se, though. So let's just open it up wide open if there's anybody who has a direct question or thought to share with Irene. Oh, there we go. Jerry and Stephen. So 2 people responded. Jerry, you got in first.
Oh, thank you very much, Irene. That was a wonderful, wonderful lecture. I'm just going back over my notes, and I wrote here that I think you said that Don Carlos and William Tell was banned in 1941 to 45. Was that in Germany?
Yes, of course, yeah.
It just struck me that if you have the Congress of Cultural Freedom, supposedly to fight Bolshevism, communism, why would they ban Schiller? It doesn't make sense, but now it makes total sense because that Schiller was their real target.
Yeah, but in a way, Gerald, in a way, those who financed and who brought about, I mean, the CIA, admittedly, the Congress for Cultural Freedom, in a way, they also saw to it that eventually Schiller was banned. I mean, not banned in that sense, in that open sense, but, you know, with this, I don't know the English term for it. In German, we say Regietheater. It's with this way, they produce plays on stage nowadays, for example. They cut the classical pieces they make piecemeal out of it, or even, I mean, just you don't just play them, or you don't make it obligatory on school curriculums to teach Schiller, for example. So it's also a way, I think, of banning classical literature, isn't it? It's a more subtle way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's like today they'll take a Shakespeare play in English and pretend to do it in a modern setting, and they change all the wording and change the costumes and everything, and that way they ruin the play.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They don't appreciate what exactly is classical about this place, namely that they are timeless and universal, and what is modern about them is that you have to just allow people to make their own comparisons between the time then and today, and to provide maybe historical context, or necessarily perhaps historical context to see the relevance of these classical texts in our days.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
I was just
thank
thinking
you very
in
much.
terms of painting. When I was going through art school, illustration and design, we were given these different, the students were given these different challenges to take classical paintings and massacre them, either like put mustaches on the Mona Lisa, or in another class we had to just select a product to sell, like, you know, something using classical masterpieces as part of like a rite of initiation. And it's as soon as you give people, young people who they haven't developed their minds, their souls, their wisdom, you're telling them whatever you do, however you want to interpret a classical idea, is all equally as valid as that original idea was. You're just creating the seeds for people who will then go out into the world as thinking that they're artists, just with no understanding and even a disdain for the ideas of the past by dead white European males and things like that, without thinking, well, maybe there was something I could have learned from this, and I'm already massacring it. And I guess you see the same thing in plays that are performed, as you're saying.
Absolutely, yeah. In art, of course, too. It's everywhere, and the thing that is, it is threatening that they can do this on a global scale, and this goes to show. I mean, maybe I have not made that clear enough, that the Congress for Cultural Freedom was a global thing. It was meant to destroy art and culture on a global scale. And I quoted the magazine Der Monat, but in Britain it was the Encounter, for example, or L'Épreuve in France. Prestigious, allegedly prestigious magazines. Or in art, it was the same in art. I think in the opening year of the Congress for Cultural Freedom in Paris, they had a month or even longer of festivals, musical festivals and art exhibitions. And it was all meant to support these kind of negativity, pessimism, or deconstructivism, or whatever. I mean, I still can't fully cope with the fact that this can be done on a global scale. You know, it's impossible.
And then, like you said, they even brag about it. You would think that they would be a bit more embarrassed about the CIA funding of all of this modern deconstructionist art. And yet you have things like what you cited, where they're bragging that, oh yeah, a lot of good came out of us shaping the entire art world and aesthetics.
They brag. They brag like Schwab bragged about having tutored your prime minister, Trudeau.
Yeah, and half our government. Yeah, right.
It's,
all right,
it's unbelievable.
Stephen, go for it.
Yeah.
Hi, Irene. Thank you so much for such an inspirational lecture. I truly enjoyed it. My statement is as much a comment as a question. You know, when I look at the ideals of Schiller and the truth of what he tried to teach us, as you were instructing us and making known to us, and then we look at the forces that seek to oppose that, suppress that. I take a bit of inspiration of what I see happening today in current events, and it seems to me that those people who think that watching CNN every evening makes them worldly and informed are the sort of people that, despite being well-natured, perhaps like Gertrude was talking about with the peace protest, these people are the ones that I've seen, at least in my circle, who tend to be what you might call Lenin's useful idiots, well-intentioned and think they're doing good, but they're promulgating the lack of truth. Whereas when I see these beautiful grassroots truckers and people from around the world who are rising up peacefully and nobly, you know, it's in these humble people that I see the spirit of Schiller and others embodied and coming to life. And it really gives me hope that there is, I guess, hope for the future and people. But I'm wondering if you see it similarly.
Absolutely, absolutely. That is what I wanted to express when I quoted my colleague Michael Ballweg, the IT expert from Sweden, who has not been, before that, he has not been politically involved in anything. He was just an IT expert, an entrepreneur with his own, quite making money and so on. And all of a sudden, he comes up and organizes literally 1 million people. I mean, in Berlin in summer 2020, there were 1 million people, no matter what all the other sources tell you. I was there, and I have a good impression. How do you say? I have a feeling for numbers and others too, and twice in that summer. And when he spoke, when Michael Ballweg quoted Schiller, I mean, I just couldn't believe it. But even if he had not quoted him, it was the spirit. It was the spirit, like you say, with the truckers. The truckers, the reportage that Matthew did, who had gone to Ottawa and had shown some impressions, and he also wrote about it. It was exactly the same spirit that I had experienced there. And by the way, also those walks, I don't know if you have heard of it, people are walking the walk. I quoted deliberately a line from The Walk also, because walking has become an act of terrorism almost in Germany, because every Monday in every little village, can you imagine, every district of Berlin, in every little village, and not only on Mondays now, people are simply out in the streets, no slogans, no flags, no nothing. And they are there, and this is the salt of the earth, and this is the spirit that Schiller must have sensed, because his times, the times he lived in, I mean, geniuses don't fall from sky; they are also created from the atmosphere around you, isn't it? And so people are developing their own. This is why I also say there is a new culture already beginning. We don't really see the geniuses, perhaps, but there are geniuses among us, like, for example, a guy like Michael Ballweg in Germany, and there are so many of them now coming up and speaking out. And this is the spirit of the Ridley Oath. And I was very happy when when Cynthia, I think it was Cynthia who showed or who told us that it was taken directly from the Declaration of Independence of the American Revolution. Isn't that great? I mean, we as a humanity, we are connected. We are connected, and the spirit is something, as Matthew always underlines, it is not measurable in mathematical terms. It's impossible, but it's greater.
It is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the enthusiasm.
God
Thank
within.
you.
I think that's the
Yeah,
literal
that's what it
meaning
means.
of enthusiasm. That's a good word. John is asking a question, or I don't know if it's a question so much about Schiller's Love and Intrigue, Liebe und Kabbalah, I guess, is the German translation. Have you, John, do you want to pose that in the form of a question, or are you just generally asking about it?
I just came across that browsing the internet, and it's about the I think in some of the books, like I just read an Honoré de Balzac book, the first story called The History of the 13, and he's right after Schiller. And it kind of reminded me a little bit of The Ghost Seer, because there's a conspiracy going on in the background. And in Balzac's, at least in the first story, it's like there, but you don't know what it is. And it's kind of interesting to see, apparently love and intrigue has some of the same elements in it. So I was just curious if anybody had read either of these books.
I know I've not read it. It's on the Rising Tide Foundation site. Irene, do you have any thoughts about Love and Intrigue or anything, or is that not something?
Yes, of course I have read it, but I can't make the connection right now, especially not with Balzac, because I haven't read that particular piece of Balzac. Perhaps but yeah, I mean, probably what is spiritual, what is a matter of mind, you can find it in different kinds of literature. If you are, it's interesting. Thank you for bringing that up.
I was wondering, Irene, you brought up some fascinating things. I mean, that I didn't know about. The lead on. I mean, we all sort of intimated that Schiller did not die a natural death. As I mean, there's so many brilliant young Schillerian poets, Shelley, Keats, who also did not live very long, right? Not long beyond their 20s.
Poe. Poe. What about Poe?
Poe as well, right? There's so many examples of people who we are told are merely poets, and yet there's so much more when you begin to look into what role they were playing in a broader process. Mm-hmm. And so Schiller definitely fits that bill when you consider what was going on in the world around him. But your point on Thomas Mann's insight into the death of Schiller, and then I remember you also mentioned to me a few weeks ago the issue of Demetrius, the play that Schiller had not finished. It was something he was working on when he died, and we don't know how it ends, but there was also some very, very politically charged, potent interventions being embedded within that. And I was wondering if that was something you could maybe elaborate on a little bit more. Why was this play so dangerous in the world that he lived in?
I cannot really explain that. Have you read Demetrius? Have you read?
I started, yeah. And it seemed like there was a certain color revolutionary quality, a certain Navalny type of character.
And also, I tried to read more about the background, the historical background, but it's so complicated, the Russian history. I think one would have to do more in-depth research in that particular chapter of history to understand all the allusions, which is difficult, but probably there are allusions to the day in which Schiller lived. As I said, Weimar was connected to Russia in a very, very direct sense, because Maria Pavlovna just had married in St. Petersburg the son of the Duke of Weimar. And of course, this was very important for Weimar, because she brought with her a lot of money also, and prestige and so on. And it was obviously, as far as I've read, not well seen that that Maria Pavlovna was such an admirer of Schiller. But to understand the intrigues behind that, political intrigues, I am not learned enough. I don't know enough to know that. But it is an interesting fact that Goethe wanted, he had the intention to finish Demetrius, the play, because of course he had worked very closely with Schiller, and he knew his lines of thinking. And as far as I've read, he was prevented, he was directly forbidden to do so. And who could have forbidden that? Must have been the Duke. Who else was a very close friend of Goethe? I mean, the intrigues seem to be very complicated to unravel. So I'm not the person, I have not the means to do the research. You would be the person to do the research. But you have
there's definitely a lot to work with for serious.
Other things to do. But maybe somebody gets interested, and it's definitely a fascinating crime story. I mean, people seem to be so intrigued and fascinated by crime stories, and that if they are so interested in crime, so there's crime stories that are of an enlightening quality. If you dig into it, it's just fascinating. Maybe one can inspire young people to do the research into that. Would be interesting to unravel that, because I'm sure it's connected also with international networks, which we don't, given the Ghost Seer alone. I mean, but that he had. Why did he not finish the Ghost Seer, for example? Also an interesting question. It had appeared as a series. It had appeared as a sequel. Sequel? Do you say that?
Yeah, a serial.
A serial, and then it stopped. So maybe he was not interested anymore, but there might have other reasons, mightn't there not?
Well, what about that German writer that wrote on the banker? Remember, who killed Alfred? You know, I mean, he was so good with all that he uncovered with that banker. And
you're talking about Alfred Herrhausen and the Dirk Coleman, who gave us the presentation, who's writing the book on Herrhausen's murder. He should. I'm going to make sure that he watches Irene's lecture today, and hopefully this whets his appetite as well to uncover some very important problems. That would be good.
It's history, and he's more into closer historical conspiracies. Anyway, yeah.
I have one more question, unless other people have. Does anybody else have a question? Luke, I know you want to have Michael Balbeck's name spelt out, and maybe Irene, you could send me an email on how to spell Michael Balbeck, who you'd mentioned is a really wonderful thinker that people should look more into. And
he's an IT expert, and he was organized. He organized the rallies, and then he was so much under fire that he withdrew. He is now, I mean, he's still there, but on a local scale. He's not a writer or anything of that kind, but he is an important, it was just to show how in a given historical moment, when people say enough is enough, it's like like with the Ridley Oath. It goes to show that the Ridley Oath has an actuality, yet maybe undiscovered of many. People rise up. People go out of their way to and develop capabilities they did not even know that they had them in times of struggle. If the pressure is too strong, then people will say no, enough is enough. And this is exactly what we are experiencing. And I see also that as a nation, Russia was experiencing that. When I hear that anti-Russian hysteria, it makes me really feel sick, because Russia did not only watch for so many years what happened to their brothers and sisters in East Ukraine, but they also suffered so many losses during the last years. Remember the ambassadors that were killed, yeah? The ambassador to the United Nations, the plane over the peninsula, the Saudi Arabian peninsula,
the Red Army Chorus.
No, close to the Red Sea, there was an aeroplane full with Russian holidaymakers, families, children. I mean, it was never clear how they died, how this plane crash happened, or so many terrorist activities inside Russia. I mean, I call them terrorists because they are unexplained incidences, but in particular the ambassadors that were killed. Remember, in the Russian ambassador to Turkey, and so on and so on. Or, for example, the most for me, as we are talking about arts, the Red Army Choir. Remember, was on Christmas, shortly before Christmas, on its way to Syria, because they wanted to give to their army personnel in Syria a Christmas present, and the entire choir was killed in a premature air crash shortly after the plane had set off. Does anyone remember that incident? I mean, it just, all the artists that were, all the singers, all the beautiful musicians on that plane. I mean, I think one has to really connect the lines, and how much patience was displayed by the Russian nation, given their history, what they had suffered. Millions and millions of people during the Second World War. And then the kind of bloodless ignorance of our leadership to go about Russia's security needs. You know what I mean? I mean, this is, sorry,
No, absolutely. It's above and beyond. I mean, it's really, and you mentioned at the beginning the Palmyra concert. I think that was a great example of just the nature of the spiritual fight at play that most people miss when they think about geopolitics, regime change in Syria, and what have you. But when
and you know what, the director. Grigoriev, who gave that concert after Palmyra for the first time was liberated. And Grigoriev is a director in Munich of the Munich Philharmonic. And he has now been told either he denounces Russia for their incursion in Ukraine, or he gets the sack. Have you heard that?
Yes.
That was yesterday or so.
Yeah, also a leading pianist as well, right? With the Vienna Philharmonic, has also been given similar conditions. So the blacklists are really, you can see that they're frothing at the mouth to start new blacklists once more. Yeah.
Well, that's the situation we are in, and but it will not remain like that. Things change, I'm sure.
Yeah, and they're bringing in to replace him. They're bringing in
a Montreal, the head of the former head of the Montreal Philharmonic, who is this young deconstructionist, modernist, to replace him and sink classical culture even deeper into the hole. So yeah, no, it's terrible.
Cultural Congress for Cultural Freedom at its best.
It lives on, yeah, as a zombie. Magdalena has one question, and then I guess it is this could be the last question, I suppose. Magdalena, you want to pose your question?
Yeah, thank you, Irene. That was very, very good. It was necessary. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
I just wanted to, just for a tiny bit of information, I must have missed it at the beginning when you were talking about the salon in Berlin. I think it was in Berlin that was established, where the Congress of
Cultural freedom.
Cultural freedom was established. Okay, who headed this? Who headed up this salon?
The salon was called Congress, and the place where it took place was a movie theater, which still exists, Titania Palace. And the first leader of the whole thing was Arthur Köstler, the Trotzkite, which is called in this article of the Süddeutsche Zeitung an ex-communist. And he was, of course, he was a member in the 30s of the German Communist Party, but he was a Trotzkite. And he spoke at that Congress with in the kind of hysteria we see now. Like, he was so hysterically aggressive that he had to be replaced relatively soon by Nabokov, the composer.
He was foaming at his mouth.
Yeah, foaming, exactly. Yeah.
Rabbit. It was a rabbit. Rabbit.
Yes. Foaming as a rabbit.
And you're saying Arthur Köstler was a Trotskyite?
Yeah, of course. I mean,
that's interesting. That's so interesting for me. I had read his Sleepwalkers, and it was such a sophisticated attack on creativity, where he's obviously read the works of Kepler, all of Kepler's works, and he is taking you through a false analysis of how Kepler made his discovery, destroying what Kepler actually was doing by proving that the universe was harmonic, which was the foundation of how Kepler discovered universal gravitation. It wasn't even given the name that was thrown on years later by Newton. But Kepler really discovered it using this musical Pythagorean hypothesis, which proved to be true. And Köstler is just destroying it, saying that Kepler just sleepwalked into his eureka. It was almost like he went into a hypnotic trance and just, then he discovered this formula. Very sophisticated stuff, very evil. And I'm that's such a big connection that you're making there to the CCF, Trotsky, him.
Yeah, most of them were Trotskyites. Many of them. Burnham was, James Burnham, Cynthia worked on Burnham, but he had also a leading role in that Congress. They were all connected.
Wow, yeah, fascinating.
Yeah. But it's also fascinating. You often you use the attribute psychopathic or sociopathic to qualify those intelligent people. If you go deeper into their biographies, which is also true, interesting with respect to Köstler, they are psychopaths. They are really sick people. I mean, they're sick people. Many of them.
Sick, yes.
Really sick, yeah. And obviously, though, their handlers, they exactly target such like people. Like, for example, I don't know if you know Jean Genet. Jean Genet, he was a criminal, and he not a thief, but he was a pederast, and he was I think even a murderer. I mean, he was really an evil person, a convicted criminal. And then comes Sartre and makes him a big theater dramatist. Yeah, it's crazy. Or Virginia Woolf, for example. She, I don't know how active the role was that she played, but she was, at least that's what is written about her. She was sick. She was mentally disturbed, and her husband, Woolf, Leonard Woolf, who was a Fabian, in this case, a Fabian, it's the other hand of the Trotskyite Fabian. And Leonard Wolff, this officer of colonial officer of Sri Lanka, Ceylon, then he married her for her fortune, and then he made her write, and she was a sick person, you know.
Mhm.
It's anti-human as far as my feelings go, and you find many of such individuals in that context, and obviously they are profiled, and they're looking for such individuals to do. On the one part, they are creative, and like George Orwell, I mean, he know how to write. He was a writer, but what did he do with his creative capabilities?
Mm-hmm. You know, Cynthia and I were just talking about the incredible overlap in both methodology, but also personalities with the Fabian Society and the Trotskyites. And
they are just two sides of one coin.
Yeah, there's
one coin.
Definitely a story to be pulled out. I feel like we're very close to an organizing principle that has not been properly treated, that would really tie a lot of loose ends together about what the hell happened in the 20th century with the war on culture and the war on the mind and the soul, regarding the strange, and also the theosophists and these weird Luciferian connections too,
that's so interesting.
You know, they're all interconnected, right? Yeah, there's something interesting there. Irene, you have really opened up a lot of doors here to explore. Thank you so much. And I'm going to want to pose a lot more questions to you. I know you've written an extensive essay as well, which will complement this lecture you've delivered, which we will embed together when we post this. Everyone will also have access within the description box of this video to a variety of original texts from Schiller and from other associated writers that they can dig into to develop their understanding a lot more thoroughly. Irene, do you want to leave us with any parting remarks here? I'm just so grateful that you've done this. Thank you so much.
Well, I have to, as I said at the beginning, I have to thank you, both of you, Cynthia and Matthew. You cannot imagine how grateful I am, because first of all, you are so encouraging. I mean, you are so positive, and then you're doing this incredible job of bringing all kinds of people together. You are writing, you are organizing lectures, you are communicative, and this is so very important, because these are qualities that are most wanted in this otherwise rather depressing atmosphere. But on the other hand, as I said before, there are so many people now that come on the surface, and I'm sure there is a reason for optimism. And I also wanted to refer, Matthew, something that you recently said in an interview, that there still is optimism, reason for optimism, because what these elites and cliques are doing is against natural law. It is against natural law. And also what comes up to my mind is Putin's latest speech on the empire of lies. I think that is an important speech also that everybody should watch out, because he also refers there to that the Russian people won't accept these anti-natural, lifeful, anti-cultural tendencies. And I think we have to be grateful to them and not attack them. And so there is reason for hope, but we have to work for it.
Absolutely. And I think your point as well, that in times of crisis, we find the most incredible expression of geniuses arising. And the word genius does get abused a little bit much and turned into this almost like
idolized or unobtainable idea, almost a caricature of the term. You know, you have to have crazy Einstein hair and be kind of crazy to be a genius. No, I mean, the question is just like people who can tap into very human insight and powers of communication based upon principles that are tied to our soul, God, and freedom, our inalienable rights. This is something which naturally will awaken in the most nonlinear ways. And I think we're going to continue to experience more surprises, both from individuals all over the world who you wouldn't have thought were anything necessarily special. We saw examples of that all across the American Revolution, where people broke from their profiles. They broke from their what was expected of them in stable times and became exceptionally eloquent and important individuals who contributed so much to varying degrees to the greater good. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. We've already started seeing a good deal of it, and including from nation states, statesmen who realize that they're responsible for their ancient traditions and civilizations and are tapping into deeper powers of insight and creativity than would have otherwise been accessible to them if things were, again, just sort of stable and, you know, things could just be peter on a little bit more. We're not in those normal times anymore. So that's interesting. And we just have to find that within ourselves as best as we can, right? Since shoot, you know, like we are made in, if it's true that we're made in the image of God and Schiller is right, and we have these inalienable rights, then the oligarchy is ultimately on the side of lies and of shadows. They cannot stand the light, and Putin is forcing the light upon them. So now we can see the shadow creatures freak out and go all self-cannibalistic, and that's kind of dangerous and scary, but it's also, it should give us hope as well. So, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, thank you everyone for showing up today. And next week, we're going to have Dr. Raj Vedam, who is an Indian scholar, professor who's made incredible discoveries into his analysis of the Vedas, the ancient Indian classics, including the Upanishads. And he's an astronomer, he's a philologist, he's done a lot of things. And I don't know exactly how he's going to take it, but he's going to approach this in a very unique way, tying together a new and higher meaning of the ancient Indian classics than I think a lot of people realize. And that'll be, again, next Sunday at 2 p.m. So invite your friends, invite people who you know who are truth seekers, and I hope everyone can be here again next Sunday.
Thank you very much to everybody listening.
Thank you, Irene.